Hello, and welcome back to another Museum from Home program from the Charlotte Museum of History. This weekend, we are celebrating suffrage and commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. We are celebrating the stories of the men, women, children across all walks of life who fought and struggled valiantly to make sure that everyone gets to participate in our democracy. But up until 1920, women were completely denied access to the political system. They were not allowed to cast votes. They were not allowed to be involved in the political system. But of course, we know that that didn't stop them from fighting, from striving, resisting, and persisting to make their voices heard. So today, we wanted to take a moment to talk about all of the ways that women influenced the world around them in the 19th and 20th centuries. Of course, these are just a small piece of some of the many things that women were involved in. So denied access to the electoral system, women found other ways to influence politics and have their voices heard. One of the largest women's movements in the 19th and early 20th century were the Temperance Movements, as women advocated for the prohibition of the sale of alcohol throughout the United States. Women were interested in this movement for a number of reasons, but particularly they were concerned with the role that alcohol played in the home. And they advocated for the prohibition of alcohol out of a concern for domestic violence, out of a concern for husbands spending their wages on alcohol instead of on the family. And they were also concerned about men leaving the home and leaving them to have to pick up the pieces. So women worked to raise awareness, they worked to get measures on the ballot, and in 1905, Charlotte became one of the first major cities to go dry, and Charlotte remained dry until 1938. Like any social movement, though, there were people on both sides, some women advocating for temperance and others suggesting that by prohibiting the sale of alcohol, they were actually doing more harm than good. African Americans were also concerned with prohibition, particularly because they worried that they would then be denied access to the business sphere and would not be able to have a part to play in the city of Charlotte. Another incredibly important movement is the abolition of slavery. Women were on the forefront of this conversation, of this discussion, and pushing people to realize the inhumanity of this institution. African American women were also incredibly important in raising the voices of the enslaved people and making sure that everyone throughout the country couldn't ignore the moral wrong that this institution displayed. We hear stories of enslaved women who are speaking of their experience, are talking about the damage to the home, and are talking about what it meant to have to fight and strive just to be considered a person and have control over your own life. Their stories are incredibly powerful and are an important part of this movement. Child labor laws also became an important part of not only women's social movements, but also the fight for the vote in general. Throughout North Carolina, mills were an important part of the economic system. And a lot of these machines required child labor. Children did not have to be paid as much as their adult counterparts, and these machines had small, tiny parts, and children's hands were better able to work them. However, this meant that children were denied access to education. They were forced to work in difficult and terrible conditions and often suffered from debilitating injuries. Women saw this as an incredibly wrong thing to deny children a childhood and to deny them the safety. So women advocated to enforce strong child labor laws forbidding the use of children in these mills. Now, mill owners were particularly concerned about these measures because it cut into their profits. So they were actually advocating for women to be denied suffrage because they were concerned that if women were able to vote, they would be able to get child labor laws on the books, would be able to ratify them, and would be able to eliminate the practice. Another area where women were an important driving force is actually historic preservation. The photo on the screen here is the restoration of the 1774 Alexander Rockhouse on the Charlotte Museum of History property. This particular building was actually saved and restored by 5 chapters of the Daughters of the American Revolution. This photo here is restoring the doors and the paneling in between the 2 front rooms. Women continue to be advocates for preservation and continue to work to ensure that our historic built environment of Charlotte continues to thrive. We hope that you will honor all of the contributions of women across the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries and the 20th century and into the 21st by continuing their efforts, by continuing to speak out, and of course, by registering to vote and exercising your right and responsibility as a citizen of the United States.